Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. We're in lesson 20 of the Gospel of Matthew. We're covering Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 20, and this one's called the Apostles. In our previous study, Jesus stated that the harvest was great, but the laborers were few. As this chapter begins, Jesus adds workers to that harvest by sending the 12 apostles out. Let's read our first passage, Matthew 10, verses 1 through 4. And when he had called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. This seems pretty straightforward, but for some of the apostles there is slightly different information in each of the synoptic gospels. Don't worry, the same 12 always are identified, but there are some different descriptions. Certainly, Lebbaeus is the one who is the most confusing. He is identified by Matthew as Lebbaeus with the surname of Thaddeus. A surname, of course, is a last name, so this man was named Lebbaeus Thaddeus, though it does not seem like surnames occurred often in Bible times. Mark just referred to him by his surname of Thaddeus. And Luke goes in another direction, saying that his name is Judas, son of James. He was also called Jude, and it is entirely possible that someone tried to get his attention by yelling, "Hey, Jude." He is also called Judas of James in Luke 6:16 and Acts 1:13. We can see in John 14:22 that he is identified as Judas not Iscariot, using parentheses. Perhaps all the variances in his name were simply attempts to protect the innocent, ensuring he was not mistaken for the traitor. Another one not as confusing as that is James, the son of Alphaeus, who is not to be confused with James, the son of Zebedee. James, the son of Alphaeus, was also referred to as James the Lesser. I'm not sure if that was in deference to the other James in power, or maybe James the Lesser was smaller. Of course, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all identified Judas Iscariot as either the one who betrayed him or the one who would betray him in advance of that event, revealing that aspect of the plot before it occurs. Iscariot means man of Kerioth, with Kerioth being a town in the southernmost part of Judah near Edom and also near the Dead Sea. We will become more familiar with their names in the New Jerusalem, as each one of the foundation stones will bear one of their names. As stated before, my opinion is that Paul will be the apostle represented with a foundation bearing his name, rather than Judas Iscariot or Matthias. Of course, Matthias was the replacement for Judas Iscariot, chosen by the other apostles by casting lots. But it seems much more likely that Paul was the apostle whom God chose. We will have to wait and see if one foundation will be named Lebbaeus, Thaddeus, Judas, or Jude. I will guess it won't be Judas. Next, we can notice that Jesus called these 12 disciples to him. Emphasis on the word disciples. Each were chosen for a reason. And yes, that included Judas Iscariot. One mere verse later, they are referred to as apostles. What's the difference? Well, disciples are followers of Jesus who devoted themselves to Jesus and his teachings. On the other hand, the word apostle means sent out, and Jesus sent these chosen and appointed men out to preach the gospel and to minister to others. Notice that Jesus gave them the power to heal all kinds of sicknesses and all kinds of diseases. In addition, Jesus gave them power over demons and to cast them out, though we learn later that some demons can only be removed by much prayer and fasting. Today we have men who claim to be apostles. Not many Christians agree with that, as an apostle seems to represent someone who witnessed the life of Jesus firsthand. That would include Paul, as the Bible makes it sound like Jesus taught Paul for 3 years in Arabia, and yes, this was after Jesus had returned to heaven. But as the New Jerusalem was completed, so did this assignment from God as apostles. Most today will agree that anyone claiming to be an apostle today is a false teacher. Bill Johnson of Bethel Church in Redding, California, is one who claims to be an apostle. There's also a sect today called the New Apostolic Reformation, making similar claims. Okay, let's read the next section. Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 through 15 says this: These 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belts, nor bag for your journey, nor two tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs, for a worker is worthy of his food. Now, whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into a household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Why did Jesus tell them not to enter Samaritan or Gentile cities? God had a purpose and plan, as he always does, and we never should lose sight of that fact, that the Jews were his chosen people, are his chosen people. Before the Abrahamic covenant, God had this plan in place. And because he is omniscient, God knew what the response of the Jewish people would be when Jesus walked as a man in the Holy Land. The multitudes who came to be healed, and even the multitudes who came to hear the words of Jesus, would not follow him to the cross. The Church of Jesus was not a megachurch when he died, nor was it a megachurch when he was resurrected. Not all Jews turned their backs on Jesus, though. The apostles were Jewish followers of Jesus, and certainly their hearts for their own people never turned away from wanting their fellow Jews to hear and follow the good news. But it was all a part of God's plan. Has God turned his back on the Jews? Absolutely not. Instead, a time is coming when the Jewish people and the nation of Israel will once again be God's focus. In the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, his ministry was to the Jewish people. Jesus had a heart for the lost sheep of Israel and preferred ministering to those sheep rather than going to a goat farm. The gospel would be spread to the four corners of the earth in its time. The instructions from Jesus were quite interesting. First, he told them to preach the kingdom of heaven. That phrase tells us much. For there to be a kingdom, there also must be a king, and Jesus is the King of Kings. A kingdom has a population of subjects of the king, and Jesus offered everyone willing to accept his invitation to be a part of that kingdom to come. Just as Jesus stated in the prayer tutorial that we know as the Lord's Prayer, he said, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." God's kingdom will exist on earth when Jesus rules and reigns for 1,000 years on the throne of David at Mount Zion. But God reigns in the kingdom of heaven right now. Heaven also speaks of resurrection, the resurrection of Jesus and the resurrection of his followers. Because he would conquer death, so can we. He gave the apostles immense power to heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, and cast out demons. Most importantly, Jesus told them not to take any gold, silver, or copper in their money belts, nor any provisions, food, or extra clothes. The message they would bring was worthy of others taking care of them, providing for their basic needs. This should remind us of the Old Testament verse. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 4 says, "You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain." The Apostle Paul was frustrated with the inability of people to understand this, and consequently, Paul paid his own way most of the time, working as a tent maker. But Jesus told the apostles to judge the town on its hospitality. Those who did not show hospitality would bring judgment upon their town, worse than the judgment God imposed on Sodom and Gomorrah. We will see this verse in the next chapter of Matthew, and it will identify some of the cities to be judged. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, who are exalted to heaven, will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. Okay, let's read our final passage today. Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 through 20 says this, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you." Jesus gives two wonderful animal analogies. The first one most of us are familiar with because it is similar to one used to depict false teachers. But notice the difference. When there is a congregation of sheep, the wolf is usually singular. In this case, however, Jesus sends the apostles as the teachers, the smaller group, speaking to the larger group. In this case, the wolves are the larger group, depicting the congregation of people receiving the message. This imbalance will require wisdom on the part of the apostles. Casting pearls before swine comes to mind. But in the second analogy, Jesus reminds the apostles to be wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. Many people who claim to have wisdom don't have the common sense to come in from the rain. Some are impressed with their own words, even how great they sound when speaking. Jesus wants the apostles to demonstrate the same humbleness that Jesus himself exudes. Also remember the Holy Spirit who came down from heaven like a dove when Jesus was baptized. Think about this for a moment. God is all-knowing. That means there's nothing he does not know. Some people sound like they are know-it-alls, but Jesus is a know-it-all and still manages to exude meekness, humbleness, and gentleness. Those attributes appeal to far more people than the opposite of those attributes: overbearing, arrogant, and forceful. Jesus was trying to protect these men. In the next verse, he speaks of the men who will deliver the apostles up to the councils and synagogues for punishment. Some apostles also would be brought before governors and kings because of their testimonies of Jesus. Again, only 2 of the apostles were not martyred. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer of Jesus, killed himself after Jesus was placed on the cross. John was burned in oil but did not die, and the rest of the apostles were killed because of their testimony. James, the brother of John, was the first apostle to be martyred, around 44 AD. Bartholomew was next, and was beaten and beheaded. Both Peter and Paul followed, and Paul certainly fulfilled this prophetic statement from Jesus as he testified before councils and kings. Matthias also was decapitated. Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Philip all were crucified. Thomas was killed by a spear. Matthew died as a martyr in Ethiopia, and tradition says he was decapitated or burned alive. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross. James the Lesser was stoned by a crowd and beaten with a club by a mob. Before panicking in anticipation of our own possible futures, just hold tightly to this fact. If God calls us to be martyrs, he also will give us the power to endure. He never will leave us nor forsake us. We also need to understand what the martyrdom of the apostles did to the message of the gospel. It is one thing for a misguided man to be willing to die for his belief, but at the same time, it is quite unlikely that a ragtag group of men will be willing to sacrifice their lives for Jesus after the death of Jesus, unless they were 100% certain that Jesus conquered death. Yes, people can be misguided, as we can see with the Muslim suicide bombers, but the apostles believed strongly when they were walking with Jesus, then all scattered when Jesus was crucified, and then they reunited when Jesus rose from the dead and came to see them. That gave power to their messages, power to their lives, and conviction to the distance they were willing to go. This can be a bit of a wake-up call. Do we really believe what we claim to believe? Is our belief in Jesus worth more than silver and gold? Is it worth more than our lives? This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.